Night in the Woods is, first and foremost, about the recovery and growth of May Borowski upon her return to Possum Springs. It's about ripping the band-aid off of old wounds, like the killer incident, and patching up new ones, like leaving college, and putting all of these scars in a new context with her discovery of the cult, the Black Goat, and the Glimmer. She's the object of our focus, the character we see changing and learning with every new mistake and milestone during the 2 weeks we spend with her. But even as she recovers, May has a lasting impact on those around her, on the characters she encounters and befriends. We've talked about the major players, like Greg and Bee, but May's presence is just as impactful on the many side characters she meets during her travels. And there's no side character who benefits more from meeting May than Lori Meyers. Through her hangouts with Lori, we see that despite the fact that May is in recovery herself, despite the fact that she still has a lot of growing and learning to do, that she is still able to have a positive impact on someone younger than herself. Someone who needs a friend, someone who really needs a mentor, and ultimately, someone who might end up becoming one of her most trusted supporters in the years to come. But before I go on, if you are a Night in the Woods fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. For silver tier members on both platforms, you get early access to all of these videos and more, so be sure to check that out if you haven't already. We meet Lori on May's first full day back in Possum Springs. From a storytelling perspective, their initial conversation is rather noteworthy. Lori calls May killer, which marks the first time anyone in the game references the softball incident with Andy Cullen. I'll never forget the way my wife and I reacted to this on our initial playthrough. We stopped, looked at each other with our mouths wide open, and really wondered where the developers were going with this, with May's big dark secret. It's a moment that still stands out to me all these years later, as it's one of the many ways the developers showed us, right from the early going, that Night in the Woods was not just going to be a game with cute, anthropomorphic animal characters, but a piece of media capable of covering a variety of serious topics. In any case, May responds to her as anyone else would when a stranger brings up the worst moment of their life and the awful nickname the people of Possum Springs have straddled her with. When she makes mention of Lori's mother, the conversation takes another unexpected turn, as Lori reveals that her mother is gone. We don't get any more information than this about Lori's mom, but the implication, clearly, is that she passed away. Once again, another early game sign about the narrative depth of Night in the Woods, despite its outward appearance. All in all, it's a pretty awkward first conversation. But from this initial misfire, a friendship really does grow between Lori and May. Starting on day 4, May can have daily conversations with Lori by jumping up on top of the telephone wires and scaling a few buildings. While looking down on Main Street, they'll talk about a variety of things, but primarily Lori's interests, namely horror movies and her dream of becoming a director. As many have pointed out, Lori's last name is surely a reference to Michael Myers, the infamous horror movie villain from the Halloween series, a clear indication of just how much the developers associate her love of horror flicks with her character. But it's not all fun and games for May and Lori. They have a few more awkward moments, just as they did when they first met. All of these come when they discuss their living situations. Lori lives on Chestnut Street, by the train tracks, and from the sounds of things, her house is falling apart. The train shakes her room at night, and sometimes she wakes up to discover that bits of the ceiling have fallen on top of her. When May tells her that she lives on Maple Street, Lori says that that's where the rich people live. All of this tells us that Lori comes from a lower income family, probably due in large part to the fact that only her father is around to bring in an income. May is shocked to hear that Lori views her home as a place where rich people live. May sees her family as middle class, which is largely true. But again, this is another great example of how effectively the game broaches serious topics, in this case, economics. Of course someone like Lori, who literally has pieces of ceiling falling on top of her at night, would view May's more privileged upbringing as upper class. Regardless, Lori responds to May's surprise in dramatic fashion. She apologizes profusely, hyperventilates, and stutters. This becomes a key component of her character moving forward. Anytime there's a slight disagreement, or May says something unexpected, she repeats this cycle of behavior. All of this is a sign of her socially awkward nature, of someone who does not have many friends and does everything she can to hold on to the ones she has. We also see that she has very low self-esteem, as evidenced by the number of times she describes herself as gross. If May continues to talk with Lori, she'll eventually invite her to the train tracks to engage in one of her favorite activities, leaving action figures on the tracks to see what they look like after they've been squished by the trains. This is, quite clearly, a deeply personal ritual for Lori. For May to be invited here, into Lori's inner sanctum, to a side of herself she's never shown anyone else, shows a lot about how much she trusts May at this point in the game. They do this twice, and both times Lori shares more about herself than ever before. She'll tell May about her sleeping habits, her family's holiday decorations, that she once tried to smoke, and something impulsive she nearly did on a trip to Bright Harbor with her aunt. They're beautiful segments that really show how much their friendship has grown. At the end of the second one, May even goes so far as to break out a big sister routine, telling her to be careful, but refusing to elaborate further. This comes at a point in the game when things are at their most dramatic, when May is trying to get to the bottom of her suspected ghost and the Harfest kidnapping, so it's natural that she be concerned about her new friend. But still, it's ironic to see May essentially pulling an Aunt Molly, and demonstrates just how much she's come to value Lori's presence in her life. By the end of the game, Lori reciprocates this level of friendship. On day 11, she's among the many characters who draws attention to May's declining health. And after May falls during her escape from the cult, Lori is among the characters May dreams about talking with her parents in the church. As I've said elsewhere, this segment is open to interpretation, so your take on it is as good as mine. We know from dialogue that Aunt Molly and Dan McConnell found May in the woods, and that May was in the hospital at some point. But everything about what we see in the church, and later when May is in an actual hospital bed, leads me to believe that these are dreams. I think the most likely scenario is that Aunt Molly and Dan McConnell brought May to the church, and contacted her parents from there. Her parents then showed up and took our injured protagonist to the hospital. And along the way, May dreamed about what she imagined was happening in the places she was indeed in. All of this is to say that while this moment with Lori in the church did not truly happen, as it's just a dream, Lori's words are in all likelihood an accurate reflection of how May views Lori. As a true friend, someone who she believes has benefited from her presence in her life. In the epilogue, Lori will be happy to see May, telling her that she heard she was in the hospital. May gives her the Cliff Notes version of what happened, even telling her about the cult. To be clear, May is obviously just kidding around here, fully aware that Lori won't buy her story anyway. But the fact that she still does it, once again, speaks volumes. May then breaks out her big sister routine twice more. First when Lori reveals that it was her who vandalized the mural of the dudes back at the end of the first act. May chastises her, in a way that reveals just how much she's come to appreciate her hometown over the last 2 weeks, in spite of all of its flaws. Finally, at the end of their conversation, they start discussing holiday plans, at which point May invites Lori to join her family for Thanksgiving dinner. Once again, Lori hyperventilates, blown away by the offer. Lori initially says no, and they end up tabling the discussion, but I know I'm not alone in hoping that she changes her mind on this one. Looking at Lori's character arc, the first thing that stands out to me is the initial confidence with which she approaches May. For someone who can't handle the slightest disagreement during the rest of the game and apologizes profusely all the time, it's stunning to see her just go ahead and call May killer without a second thought. To help us understand this, I think it's best to turn to Lori's interest in horror movies. In so many horror movies, we're told at the beginning that the monster is a vile, abominable hellspawn capable of nothing but acts of evil. But as the movie goes on, we often discover that the monster is misunderstood, or simply acting in the only way it knows how. We see this dynamic in some form reflected in their budding friendship. At the beginning, Lori takes an interest in May because to her, she's like a real-world horror movie monster. Someone known around the town as Killer, who once beat up a kid with a baseball bat without explanation and sent him to the hospital. But over time, Lori discovers that there's so much more to May. Like she says in the dream, she feels that May is a nice person and a friend to her. Much in the same way that the protagonist of a horror movie, say Frankenstein or some versions of Dracula, come to understand that the monster is not truly evil, but misunderstood or burdened by forces beyond their control. But the most important aspect of their friendship is the impact that May has on Lori. As mentioned earlier, Lori's mom is gone, and based on the fact that she says her father won't be around for Thanksgiving, it sounds like he must leave her on her own quite often. Couple this with the fact that Scott Benson has stated that the original inspiration for Lori was a kid he saw climb out on the roof of his house and read a book to escape the screaming adults inside, and you've got the makings of a character who has no adults to rely on, no one to look up to or trust. Countless people have overcome the dual hardship of losing a parent while they were young and having the other one be absent or at the very least distant, as Lori does. But make no mistake, growing up without a single older person to admire or view as something of a mentor is a recipe for disaster. Fortunately, by the end of the game, May does become that sort of influence in Lori's life. Someone she can talk to about anything, whether it's her love of horror movies, her dream of becoming a director, the first time she smoked a cigarette, or sleeping between the train tracks. And in turn, this shows May that as bad off as she is right now, as much as she's going through, she is still capable of doing a tremendous act of good, of being a mentor and a true friend to someone desperately in need of both of those things. We'll never know how their friendship would have continued to blossom in Night in the Woods 2. But I have no doubt that in a sequel, May and Lori would have grown even closer. I can easily imagine Lori calling up May while she's in Bright Harbor to tell her about the horror movie she's working on, and coming out to see May in her wrestling matches and marveling at all of the violence. And out of all of the characters who weren't involved in the climax, I think Lori might be the only one May would have been willing to talk to about what happened with the cult and the black goat. Lori shared some of her deepest secrets, so I think it's only fitting to imagine that it would have been time for her mentor to do the same. And that's what makes Lori so important to Night in the Woods. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to my Night in the Woods collaborators Jordi, Jaen, Moreno, and Wolf.Godwin for my channel art and the music for my videos. Special shout out to my silver tier channel members James Pruitt and Raven Lampkin, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 a month. For my next character commentary video, I'll be taking a look at another often requested character from Night in the Woods, Selmers. Can't wait to talk about her and her fantastic poetry. But next week, I'll be heading back into the world of Disco Elysium to take a close look at the Hardy Boys. See you guys then.